What about that waxy cuticle and the low levels of stomata? Yes, we know from school that things like holly and ivy retain their leaves because the leaves are waxy, and so the plants don't need to drop their leaves, and we call them evergreens. That isn't true. They do drop their leaves. They shed them spasmodically throughout the spring. If you look underneath a holly tree, and you will be up to your ankles in shed holly leaves. They don't all shed them at the same time and in autumn, which is why we rightly think of them as evergreen plants. But they do shed their leaves. It isn't true that they do not need to do so. It is a laurel growing in its prime. Look down at where the the ground from which the laurel has sprung, and what do you find? Again, you're up to your ankles in dead, abscised laurel leaves. The laurel plant is shedding its leaves all the time. It is not the case that because it is an evergreen, it does not need to shed its leaves. It does, ladies and gentlemen. If you look at the ground in rainforest, and you will see all around you, ankle deep, shed leaves from otherwise evergreen trees. So that waxy cuticle that is necessary for the plants to survive winter is all well and good, but that again does not explain that plants don't drop their leaves, because evergreens drop their leaves just like any other plant. And this is the example that used to get me most worried of all. Here is a young seedling palm. This is an oil palm of the kind that every time I go to Malaysia, I see more of the forest has been bulldozed and these wretched things have been planted in their place. But the politics aside, just look at that as a plant. Plenty of growth, lots of photosynthetic tissue exposed evenly and well to the sun. It's the way a plant should be designed. And if the plant grows taller, it'll grow more and more leaves, it'll gather more and more sunlight and capture increasing levels of solar energy the bigger it gets. But that's not what happens. If you look at a palm tree and you see that, again, there is this overwhelming imperative to drop leaves at any cost. The tree would be far better advised to keep all its leaves, but it doesn't. As it grows, it sheds its leaves all the time. Every season, another circle of rings is shed below the new green leaves that have just begun to develop. And on occasions, these trees can grow extremely tall. And it was watching trees like this in rainforest in northern Australia some years ago that suddenly fitted pieces of a jigsaw together in my inquiring mind. On occasions, you can see palm trees that grow to almost bizarre lengths. Just look at the size of this resident of the state of Florida alongside this indeterminate growing palm tree. That's the only photosynthetic part of the plant. Now, some ingenious people, and I wouldn't quarrel with them because I like the line of argument, have even said that the reason that coconut palms are designed to blow about, thrash about in a strong gale, is because they may bend towards the sea, flick back towards the land and throw their coconuts well up in land where otherwise they couldn't germinate. Now, it may even be that's happened. That's perfectly possible. Whether that explains why all such palms always lose their leaves, though, seems to me improbable. And when you see a site like that, this plant is putting itself at a great metabolic disadvantage by shedding so much of its photosynthetic surface as it grows. There is a cost to a plant when it grows leaves. It has to invest energy. It has to invest raw materials in the components, the cells that are going to build up those leaves. So to throw them away is a drain on a plant's resources. If, as we're always being told, plants are struggling to find enough nutriment, if they're always limited in terms of the amount of water they can locate, then presumably the better they can harness solar energy and grow, the better they will be in the future. But here is an evolutionary impulse that seems to be working against that. So, back to the current biology books. What makes leaves fall off? We were all told that an abscission layer forms at the base of a leaf, and that's why it drops off. And that's exactly what this says. A layer of cells grows across the leaf stalk at the point where it's attached to the main stem or branch. All right, let's have a look. Here is a drawing by Alice Adicott, Fred Adicott's wife. And here is the drawing of the abscission layer and the layer of cork that subsequently forms and becomes the separation layer. All right, that's fine, except that many plants never grow an abscission layer. And even when some do, they don't always use them as they should. Let me take you to a beechwood in autumn. In springtime, that pale, limpid, lucid green colour of beech leaves when the sun shines through them, dappling on the ground, is a wonderful colour. And they're just as beautiful, subtly beautiful, in the autumn. So come into a beechwood and look at the autumn colours. Look down at the floor, and you will see these delicate golden yellow hues from the leaves that have been shed. And yet, those of you who are horticulturists or amateur gardeners know perfectly well that a beech hedge is quite a neat thing to have, and there the leaves will turn brown. They will develop their abscission layer, but they don't get shed. So it clearly isn't necessary or inevitable even that a deciduous plant will shed its leaves. So almost all, why am I saying almost, all of the basic precepts that we were taught since school can be falsified when you stop and look at them closely. There's only one plant in the world that doesn't shed its leaves. Welwitschia. Welwitschia grows in the deserts of Angola and Namibia. It's a grotesque plant. It grows rather like horny toenails on the desert, a metre or two across. Welwitschia doesn't shed its leaves, but what it does do is have the end of the leaves become brown and dry and dead. So, as it were, it doesn't abscise its leaves, but the ends of the leaves still go brown and dry and dead. It's almost like a sort of autumnal degeneration at the end of each single leaf. But that is the only vascular plant in the world that doesn't shed its leaves. It's named from an Austrian botanist of the 1800s, Wellich, who went out and discovered it and brought it back to some of the botanical gardens in Europe. And indeed, it is, to this day, a unique and fascinating plant. Back to the biology book. Why do we have these autumn tints? You may know that leaves contain yellow and orange pigments, xanthophyll and carotene, and so much chlorophyll that the pigments don't show up. Towards the end of summer, the chlorophyll breaks down and disappears, but the other pigments remain. Well, can it really be that these brilliant red colours were there in the leaves all the time? That's what we were all taught. That's what children to this day are taught in schools. As the chlorophyll is removed from the leaves as autumn approaches, these other colours from the carotenoids and xanthophylls are revealed for the first time. Indeed, this view is still current. Here is a Science News report from 2007. Many of the colours we see in the fall are always present, but they're hidden from view. This remains the current theory, but it manifestly isn't true. And here's the microscopic bit, which won't surprise any of you. Let me take you down the microscope, and we'll look at a section of an acer leaf, which is destined to become a beautiful blood-red crimson colour in the autumn, and let us look at it in late September. These vertical cells are the palisade cells in the upper layers of the leaf, and I want you to notice that in this section some of the upper layer of palisade cells have begun to accumulate keratin-like pigments. If you would like to section a leaf a week later, look at it under the high-power microscope, you can see how the intensity of the colour is deepening, and looking at under low power a week or so after that, you can see that now most of the cells in the upper layer contain these deep red pigments. The second layer of palisade cells doesn't actually contain them at all, which I find particularly interesting. Look under high power and you can see that this is not the withdrawal of chlorophyll. These are the chloroplasts within each of these cells. I haven't stained this section, this is the natural colour, and you can see how the chlorophyll is perfectly visible. This is the deposition of red pigments, ladies and gentlemen, which are being deposited in the leaf. They are not being revealed when the green of the chlorophyll is removed as winter approaches. By the time the leaf is ready to fall, and just look at the density of the red pigment in the upper layer of palisade cells. Curiously, you will see here that when these upper palisade cells are completely chock full of pigment, that some of the cells in the second layer begin also to acquire the red pigment. Under the high power magnification, you can get a more vivid impression of the amount of pigment that's been pumped into these leaves. And under very high power, you can see there is a nucleus in the epidermal cells, and this is the second layer of palisade cells. But just look at the density of blood red pigment that's been pumped out into these cells. No, it isn't true, as the books say, that these colours are revealed as the chlorophyll is withdrawn. The colours are manufactured and pumped out into the leaf. The colour is produced. So how come we always talk of these leaves as being senescent? We look in the dictionary. Senescence is the process of growing old, especially the condition resulting from the transitions and accumulations of deleterious aging processes. Yes, that's what senescence is. Senescence is getting old. Senescence is grinding to a halt. Senescence is running downhill. So now let us have a look at what people say about leaf senescence, as they call it. Leaf senescence involves a coordinated action at the cellular, tissue, organ and organism levels under the control of a highly regulated genetic program. That isn't senescence. That's doing something. It's a curious fact that the metabolic rate of a leaf when it changes colour increases, doesn't decrease. Senescence results in the lowering of metabolic rate. But in what I call the metachromatic leaf, the leaf that is changing colour, ladies and gentlemen, the rate of metabolism actually goes up. Let's have a look at this. It says quite clearly, leaf senescence is a developmentally programmed degeneration process, note that, degeneration, controlled by multiple developmental and environmental signals, and is a highly regulated and complex process that involves orderly sequential changes in cellular physiology, biochemistry, and gene expression. This isn't like senescence. This is the cells doing something, not stopping doing something which they would have to do.